Well, good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Rosie, and I'm from the YWCA Greenwich Domestic Abuse Services. And today we're continuing our conversation about teen dating violence. And so before we continue on with our presentation, I just want to remind everyone of our guidelines. Please take care of yourself during this conversation. This is not an easy subject for everyone to talk about, and so I'm happy to have any of you put your heads down or go get a drink of water or do whatever you have to do to take care of you. The other ground rule is that, during our time in health class talking about teen dating violence, you might want to talk about teen dating violence. You might want to tell a story about a friend that you know who's in one of these relationships. But I just ask that if you're going to tell a story, you don't use anyone's name. So you can say, I have a friend who, or I know somebody who, but you want to be really careful to protect the privacy and the safety of people who are here or who are not here. So that being said, in our first time together, our first session together, we learned about the 6 different types of abuse. And I'll just put them on the screen here for you to see. We have physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, financial, and digital abuse. And so we know that abuse in relationships happens in many different forms. It's not just physical abuse when we're thinking about intimate partner violence. And then we started to talk about the cycle of abuse, and we're going to go over this a little bit together again. Let's see if I can move myself. Okay. So every relationship is going to start out in what we would call the honeymoon phase, where things are just really good. Things feel really good in that relationship. We enjoy spending time together. We want to hang out all the time. But the number one warning sign that a relationship could become abusive is when the honeymoon phase intensifies very, very quickly. So it goes from I like you to I love you to I can't see myself spending a single day of my life without you, right? And so the honeymoon phase is intensifying really quickly, maybe so quickly that one person doesn't feel totally comfortable with the pace that things are going, but they don't really feel like they can slow things down. And then what happens next is that the tension will start to build in the relationship. And so really the tension building phase feels like the victim is walking on eggshells. Maybe they're feeling like, I'm not sure what I'm afraid of. I'm not sure what I'm afraid of. I'm not sure what I'm afraid is going to happen, but I know that if I don't delete those numbers off my phone, or if I sit in that spot on the bus again, I know that it's going to really upset my partner. So I'm not going to do that, right? And so really what happens during the tension building phase is that the victim starts to think more about the abuser and less about themselves. And then of course there's some sort of an explosion. And that explosion could be physical, it could be a sexual explosion, a verbal explosion, an emotional explosion. It could be that girl showing up to the basketball game after having tracked her boyfriend on Snap Maps, right? It's really anything that would make us feel like, ooh, I don't know if I want to be in this relationship anymore. But it's unique in abusive relationships that after an explosion phase, the relationship will immediately return to the honeymoon phase. So maybe the abuser will make apologies, they'll make promises that they'll change, but the abuse will continue, right? The cycle will ultimately continue, even though in the honeymoon phase we feel like, oh, that was just a bad day, right? And so this is important because these relationships are not bad all of the time. In fact, sometimes they're really, really good, right? And so that can be very confusing for a victim in these relationships because they might think to themselves, well, sometimes our relationship is like really great. So it couldn't possibly be abusive, and that's just not true, right? So this leads us to the $1 million question, which is, if these relationships are so bad, then why don't they just break up? And so when we think about, in pop culture, there's lots of examples of people who, returned to their abuser or they married their abuser, even though they knew that their abuser was abusive, right? And, there's actually a lot of complicated and complex reasons why people can't just break up with their partner, right? The number one is denial. They may be in denial that they're in an abusive relationship at all. If somebody just has this very narrow view of what an abusive relationship looks like, then they might not recognize that what's happening to them is abuse. They may have become dependent on their partner. That dependence could be emotional dependence. It could be financial dependence. when I think about dependence, I'm reminded that people in abusive relationships become very, very isolated from their support systems. So, when the option comes up, maybe I should break up with my partner, it can be very scary to think about who am I going to turn to? Who am I going to go to and talk to about my day if I don't have this person in my life anymore? They might have hope that the relationship is going to get better, because we know from the cycle that sometimes the relationship does get better, right? So they might think to themselves that, this relationship is going to eventually get better permanently. They might be afraid, and the fear is twofold. So we know that when victims are the most at risk of violence is when they're trying to leave the abusive relationship. We know that they're more likely to die, and they're also more likely to be physically hurt if physical violence hadn't been present before. So we know that the fear of what will happen if I leave, what will happen to me if I leave, is very real. But sometimes we hear, especially from teenagers, that abusers will say that they might hurt themselves if the victim leaves, right? And so that's a different type of fear. That's the fear of what's going to happen to you if I leave. We hear that with teenagers a lot, and it's important to just kind of say here that, if anyone should ever make a statement like that to you, whether it's a dating partner, a friend, just somebody that you know, the most important and best thing that you can do is to share that with a trusted adult, because it's not your job to figure out if that person means it or if they have a plan. Really, your only responsibility is to pass that information along to a professional who can really help them. There might be pressure to keep the relationship together. That pressure could be pressure from a family. It could be pressure from a social group. The YWCA worked with a young woman who didn't want to break up with her partner until after prom was over. And the reason for that was that she had hired the limo and the photographer to come to her house, and all of her friends were coming to her house. And she was really nervous that if she broke up with her boyfriend, that she would ruin prom for everyone, right? And even though that pressure might not seem significant to us sitting here right now, we have to remember that for that person at that time, that was really important to her, right? They could blame themselves for the abuse, especially remember that they've been told over and over and over again that the abuse is their fault, right? So, of course, if you hear that from the person that you love over and over and over again, you might start to believe it, right? And so that the victim could blame themselves for what's happening to them in the relationship. They could be blackmailed into staying. Blackmail is when somebody is threatening to tell other people something that is either true about you or not true about you, right? So there was an incident where there was a young man at GHS who went to break up with his girlfriend in the senior year of high school. And she told him that she was going to call all of the colleges that he'd gotten into and tell them that he had cheated on his SATs, right? And so he didn't cheat on his SATs, and she didn't end up calling, but what she was attempting to do was blackmail him. And then, of course, there's time. So, if two people have been together for a long time, it could be very difficult to imagine what life would be like without their partner. So for all these reasons, we know that on average, it takes a victim of abuse around 8 attempts to actually leave the abusive relationship. So meaning they might leave and go back to their abusive partner 8 times before they're actually able to leave. So that's important for us to know because, really this information is important for you in your own relationships, but it's also important because you will definitely know someone who's in an unhealthy or abusive relationship. So we want to give you the tools to help a friend. And so we're going to go over a few tips and tricks for how to help a friend. These are just some basic tenets that you might want to follow if you're ever in this situation. Okay, let me move myself here. Okay, so the number one thing that you can do seems kind of self-explanatory, but of course you want to let your friend know that you're going to be there for them. And you have to remember that this person might be isolated from everybody else in their life, their friends, their family, and you might be the only person that they're still speaking to. So let your friend know that you're going to be there for them no matter what they choose to do. And if you're concerned about the relationship, you should certainly let them know that, but be very specific about your concerns. So instead of criticizing the abuser and saying, hey, your girlfriend's the worst and she's abusing you, you might want to try saying something like, hey, I noticed that your girlfriend gets very upset when you don't answer the phone right away. And I just wanted to check in with you and see how you felt about that, right? Because that way your friend can't really argue with you about what you've observed. You definitely want to keep your friend's information private. That's why we talk about confidentiality so often when we give these presentations, because we would never want for someone's abuser to get wind that the victim has been speaking about what's happening in the relationship, because that can put the victim in more danger. And the same goes for confronting the abuser yourself, right? So we do not suggest that you confront the abuser yourself, because you could put yourself and your friend more at risk. And then finally, we just ask that you don't text your friend information about the YWCA, meaning I wouldn't text my friend right now and say, hey, listen, you're in an abusive relationship. Here's Rosie's number at the YWCA. And the reason for that is that the abuser could be looking through their phone and we could be putting them, at even more danger. So when we're thinking about how to help a friend in an abusive relationship, we always have to think a few extra steps ahead about safety. If this is a subject that's interesting to you at all, or if you have any more questions or you want to learn more about the work that the YWCA is doing in Greenwich, I want to tell you a little bit about a club called YNET at Greenwich High School. YNET is the youth activism club that focuses on promoting healthy relationships through peer education and counseling and volunteer service to make social change in Greenwich. And so the YNET members are considered experts on healthy relationships and teen dating violence in the community, because they're trained annually by us. So what we do is we train the YNET students to be peer counselors at Greenwich High School, so that if there's a student who maybe is having a relationship issue, but they're not quite comfortable talking to an adult about it, that there are students in the student body that are specially trained to have these conversations. And so if that's something that's interesting to you, we do a lot of fun events. We do awareness raising. And we would love to have you. If we see you, if you are at Greenwich High School next year, you will very likely see me at the club fair. And I'm very, very excited for YNET next year. So I hope to see some of you there. So as we're just finishing up here, we've talked a lot about unhealthy relationships, but I think it's important that we talk about the signs of a healthy relationship, right? So in a healthy relationship, we communicate, we respect one another, we're honest with one another, we make equal choices, we enjoy personal time, we don't have to spend all of our time with one another, and we make mutual sexual choices, right? So we don't do anything with our bodies without permission from each other. And so I like to think about how it might feel to be in a healthy relationship, right? We certainly can imagine how it would feel to be in an unhealthy relationship. But when I think about how it would feel to be in a healthy relationship, I think it would feel comforting. I think it would feel calm. And I don't think that it would hurt, right? And so when I do these presentations, I really like to think about our best internal barometer is the way that we feel when we think about a relationship, right? So if you're thinking about a relationship and it's making you feel anxious and worried and kind of freaked out, then that's probably a sign that there's something in that relationship that's bothering you, right? But if you think about a relationship and it makes you feel calm and happy and comforted, then that's probably healthy for you, right? And if you have any questions on this, if you want to talk about one of your own relationships, if you want to talk about a friend's relationship, whatever, you are more than welcome to contact me. I work at the YWCA. I'm the youth engagement and community educator. So most of what I do is out in the community, but I certainly am available to have conversations with any students about your relationships and really, to help you find the resources that are right for you. So if anyone does have any questions, please contact me. I'd be so happy to talk to you. Thank you for being so flexible with me, as we did have to pre-record these presentations. I hope that you all have a wonderful Friday, and I will see you hopefully in 9th grade at the club fair. Okay, bye-bye.